Works for the Board of Water Supply. He's one of the board of directors. He is the 10th manager and chief engineer of the Board of Water Supply. As a manager, he is responsible for the overall strategic direction and management of the BWS, with a focus on furthering the department's mission to provide a safe and dependable water supply now and into the future. He assumed this position on February 1st, 2012. Ernest previously served as the administrator of the Public Works Division under the State Department of Accounting and General Services, where he oversaw the planning, coordinating, directing, and controlling of a statewide program of engineering, architecture, and construction services. He previously worked as Deputy Director of the State Commission on Water Resource Management, Department of Land and Natural Resources, where he worked collaboratively with the commission members to set policies and make decisions in accordance with the state water code. He also served as the manager and chief engineer of the Hawaii Department of Water from 1996 to 2003, as deputy manager from 1995 to 1996. Prior to that position, he worked for the Board of Water Supply, City and County of Honolulu for more than 14 years as an engineer in long-range planning and water system plan. So, if he is nothing else, he is an expert in water. Welcome, Ernie.
Thank you. I'm also very old, so.
Okay. Do you want me to press for you? You tell me, or do you want to do it?
Well, actually, we can do it together.
Okay.
So I can look at the slides and be able to explain what we're seeing.
Okay.
So, thank you, everybody. Welcome, and thanks for inviting me here. Joyce Lynn, actually, we work together at the Board of Water Supply. She's a civil engineer with the Board of Water Supply, and more recently, in the last, how long has it been? Not quite a year, 6 months. I've asked her to get involved on the Red Hill issue for us. It's been a real challenge because Red Hill, as you know, has been one of the biggest challenges we've been facing, especially in the last year and a half. We've been on this issue of Red Hill for now 9 years. And unfortunately, contamination occurred, and we are now trying to recover from that. So for the Board of Water Supply, thank you. Maybe I'll just point your way.
Okay.
So for the Board of Water Supply, we serve about 1 million people every day with safe drinking water. And that requires us to produce about 145 million gallons of clean, fresh water for our community. And it takes all this infrastructure from water sources, 2,100 miles of pipelines to provide water to 170,000 customers on our system island-wide. Next, please. So if you look at a cross section of the island, the question is, where does our drinking water come from? We live on an island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and we're very fortunate because we are blessed with a special geology, how the island was created, and also abundant rainfall. All of our water originates from rain falling on our Mauka watershed areas, or this ua, this rain that falls, percolates down through the volcanic rock, and under the island, all this volcanic rock is very porous. So salt water from the ocean seeps down through the cracks and crevices of the lava rock below the island. But fresh water is lighter than salt water in density. So this fresh water now accumulates floating in a way on top of the salt water below our island. So that's the light blue area that's shown here. And we take it out from different ways, through deep wells, through shafts or tunnels, water tunnels that provides water for our community. But really it's this, we are blessed to have this water resources because without this fresh water supply, you would not be able to have 1 million people living on this island and all the businesses and activity that occurs here. The challenge is this freshwater resource is also very vulnerable. Contamination can injure this precious this freshwater. Next, please. So around our island, in the coastal areas with sea level changes over the year, and as the island was built up, there are deposits of marine sediments and corals that are not as porous, and they serve to help keep the fresh water contained underground in the interior parts of the island. this lower permeability or lower porosity of this cap rock or this marine sediments helps to create like a dam to hold back the fresh water. If not, it would just normally fall from the area of recharge of the mountains of Mauka and the Ko'olaus and Waianae mountains and flow underground toward the ocean. But because of this, for every foot of height of the underground aquifer above sea level, our rule of thumb is that there is 40 feet of fresh water below, similar to an iceberg floating in a salty ocean. So that 1:40 ratio. So every 1 foot of height of this underground freshwater aquifer above sea level, we believe that there's 40 feet of fresh water below in the aquifer. So next, please. And this is what the commission indicates as how the different areas of our aquifer is broken down for management purposes. It's color coded in yellow. Pearl Harbor, the Pearl Harbor aquifer or sector is actually the largest with like 166 MGD or 166 million gallons a day can be produced from this aquifer in Pearl Harbor to supply our needs and can be withdrawn and be sustained at that rate. Island-wide, the total estimated capacity right now is almost 400 million gallons a day or 400 MGD. So we're very blessed. But over time in my career, which is kind of a long career, is I've seen this, what they call the total or the sustainable yield for the island gradually head downward. As rainfall decreases, so does the capacity of this water resource. And unfortunately, the Red Hill facility is right over the underground aquifer. In fact, it's over an area called a sole source aquifer by the EPA, where it supplies that portion of the aquifer that it's a part of, can supply about 50% of the supply for the community of Oahu. Next, please. This is a kind of a cutaway looking underground at Red Hill, that green ridge. 20 underground tanks built in 3 years, 250 feet tall, 100 feet in diameter, and the bottoms of the tanks are only 100 feet above our aquifer. Next, please. So this is just some photos from the interior of the facility if you were able to go in there. Has anybody been in the Red Hill fuel tanks? This thing was built in 3 years just at World War II. And you walk out on this narrow, kind of rickety walkway. You're looking down, 200 feet below is the bottom of the tank. So if you can picture Aloha Tower can fit in one of these tanks easily. Next, please. And there are 20 of them. So this is now looking down at Halawa Valley. Circled in yellow are the 2 Navy water sources that are shut down. The Navy has only 3 water sources serving Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam, almost 93,000 people. And 2 of them are shut down. So they have 1 remaining source in Waiawa. The 3 circles are 3 BWS wells that are still shut down: Halawa Shaft, Halawa Wells, and IN wells. Next, please. And if you were to look deep underground, this is from the Department of Health. Shortly after the contamination of the water system at Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam, where people opened up their faucets shortly after Thanksgiving, and they could smell fuel. They could see fuel floating on like an oil sheen on the water in their homes. And they drank and brushed their teeth. They bathed in it. They were exposed to this contamination. This is looking at the groundwater at monitor or test well locations in that Red Hill area and taking the highest values in that 3-month period shortly after that event and creating a heat map using like GIS tools or to plot out darker colors being higher concentrations, lighter colors, lower concentrations. And this is for diesel. Next is for oil, which is more indicative of some of the older fuels that Red Hill's been in operation for 80 years. So some of the first fuels stored there was something called bunker C, like a fuel oil, heavy fuel oil that was used to power ships during World War II, to motor gasoline, to aviation gas, now to jet fuel and diesel. Next, please. 9,700 households drank this contaminated water. Most of them were military families, but there were also civilians served by this military system. Next, please. So now we move to almost like the second chapter here. And if anybody is here from the military, please, I apologize. I don't want to offend anybody. I do believe in the military's role in supporting our defense, but I also hold them accountable for being good stewards of our environment, of our water resources. So the next issue is PFAS, per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. This is the latest thing that is, I think you're seeing in the news. This is a family of chemicals that have been around also from the 1940s. So it's like Red Hill, the underground fuel storage tank constructed by the military, 80 years old. PFAS chemicals have been used from the early 40s until the present. And these are chemicals used for various consumer products that I think most of us have in our homes. If you have stain-resistant carpeting or water-resistant clothing, PFAS is a chemical that's been used to help provide that. If you have a frying pan like I do still with a Teflon coating, non-stick coating, it may contain PFAS chemicals that was used to create that, because PFAS is very water resistant and very tough and resistant to heat. It's also been used in firefighting foams to fight petroleum fires. And the military was very instrumental in developing this back in the 50s. So adding this PFAS to the surfactants needed to create foam with the water to put out fires, PFAS made that foam heat resistant, so it wouldn't just evaporate with the heat of the fire. It could actually cut off the oxygen flow and suffocate the fire. So some of these PFAS chemicals, they're easily dissolved in water and they can last a long time in the environment. They don't break down very readily because of the carbon-fluorine bond is very strong in this chemical. And they have health effects that could include cancer too. So these are some of the pathways. This is a graphic from the EPA, from the sources going toward ending up in people. And you can see some of the primary sources, some of the secondary sources here. Primary sources include a lot of household products in our homes that we've had for a long, long time. But also secondary sources, including industrial sites, municipal solid waste, sites like landfills, sewage treatment plants, DOD facilities, airports. And then they can get into the environment through groundwater infiltration, runoff into streams or into the ocean, leachate leaking out of landfills, also in the groundwater and being pumped into the water system. So they end up primarily through two means: food and drinking water is two of the primary ways for people to start to get exposed to it. It is a big issue. Next, please. So we come now to March 29th, just a few weeks ago. The EPA publishes in something called the Federal Register some new proposed drinking water standards or regulations, something they haven't done in recent years regarding PFAS. 6 different PFAS chemicals that they want to actually pass regulations that they can enforce with water utilities across the country. There's about 66,000 public water systems across the nation, and we're all going to become subject to these regulations once they're adopted. The 6 include PFOA and PFOS, and also 4 different additional PFAS chemicals that they're looking at the blend or mixture of those chemicals and trying to regulate now a mixture. So individually PFOA and PFOS, but also 4 as a mixture. And the regulations are going to basically require us to continue to monitor for these chemicals, notify the community when we find them, like we did just recently last week, Friday, and also reduce the levels to comply with the standards or the maximum contaminant levels that they're trying to set here. What's allowable in drinking water and not allowable. Next, please. So MCL, maximum contaminant level, this is enforceable. highest level of contaminant allowed in drinking water by the EPA once they pass these regulations. Maximum contaminant level goal, MCLG. It's a goal that they want us to work toward, but it's not an enforceable level. Next, please. So this is basically in a nutshell what they look like for PFOA and PFOS. These two types of PFAS, the MCLG or the goal is 0 because they're concerned about the health effects of these two chemicals. The proposed enforceable limits that they're going to set on water utilities, their proposal is at 4 parts per trillion. So I've been involved in drinking water in the water business for a long time. And this is one of the first things I've seen that where the drinking water standard is now in parts per trillion. It started out in parts per million concentrations, parts per billion. Now we're in a nanogram per liter range in PPT or parts per trillion range. And the reason for that, some of it is that the technology and the laboratory analysis capability is now able for these chemicals to detect to at least 2 parts per trillion. So the regulations are being driven downward, and the EPA is concerned about health effects on these chemicals. I'll just pause there. Are any questions so far? I hope I'm not putting you to sleep. Yes, sir. Am I putting you to sleep?
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
On that first chart that you showed the divisions of the island.
Yes.
You talked about the how many gallons a day are being used, or it's capable.
Capable capacity.
What percentage is being used?
Right now, out of the almost 400 million, I would say about 300 million is being used.
So have they figured the daily allotment per person on the island? Like 80 gallons or 40 gallons? 80 gallons.
Well, I can tell you, at least for the Board of Water Supply customers, when we calculate on a gross sense, it comes out to be about like 150 something gallons per person per day.
150. That's high.
That's high. And we know in California, when the drought was before they had
it was 80. I lived there.
Yeah, I was going to say that Northern California, Central Valley. Yeah, so California was in a multi-year drought, some record drought conditions. They were running out of water, but now with the atmospheric rivers, I guess that's kind of reversed. But they were able to reduce their per person usage down to 80 or less than 100 gallons per day per person. So for Board of Water Supply, we feel that there is room for us to improve on here, that we can reduce through water conservation, efficiency, just treating every drop of water like a gift. We can reduce our usage some more. Your other questions? Or?
Oh, shoot, yeah.
Okay. One more, and then we can continue.
The chemicals, the PFAS you're talking about.
Yeah.
Where were you saying that came from?
I didn't really.
Where is it being used? So
I'll get. Okay, go ahead.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, if it's being flushed out, you were talking about the difference in density between salt water and fresh water. Is it denser than the salt water, or is it being mixed in with the fresh water?
It's
for example, yeah. When the amount of water becomes less, you don't have less water, you have higher contamination and less water.
I see what you're saying. So the PFAS is dissolving and blending with the fresh water.
Okay.
And the freshwater aquifer, the water in our underground aquifer is usually always moving, usually from the mountains toward the ocean, flowing by gravity. It's pulled that way underground. And so when the PFAS gets into it, it doesn't break up or degrade. It stays intact as a chemical, and then it dissolves into the water easily, so it blends with the water and is moving with the groundwater. So, but it stays intact. And because we're now required to test in the parts per trillion range, very minute amounts could have an impact here on our wells potentially. So that's what we have to monitor for. So these are 6 PFAS chemicals that the EPA is looking at regulating, and they prioritize, I think, based on they're concerned about health effects, to look at the 6 first. Your question. Go ahead. So the EPA has identified 3 potential treatment technologies. One is activated carbon, filtering the water, running it through basically charcoal, activated carbon, and then filtering the water. Activated carbon can act like a sponge and hold on to some of these PFAS chemicals and remove it from the water. The other technology is something called anion or ion exchange. That's another chemical process to exchange, get the PFAS out of the water. And then the third technology is more filtration, using nanofiltration or reverse osmosis, RO, to remove the PFAS from it.
Already deployed, then you implemented already.
For us, we've been treating 12 different locations, Central Oahu. We've been dealing with legacy pineapple pesticide contamination that goes back 40 or 50 years, trichloropropane, TCP. We've been treating for that for over 30 years now, filtering it through activated carbon in large tanks can hold 20 or 30,000 pounds per tank. And we filter the water to make it safe to drink. We use about 1 million pounds of activated carbon every year. Next.
So you guys are actively trying different, I'm sorry, someone else.
And then I'll come back to you. Sarah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
You guys are actively trying different methods of filtration of the water. Like,
so
are there ones that you guys are trying and then you're trying to pick one to clean it, or?
Well, we're going to be doing, haven't started yet. We just started to have these detections only in the recent year or two. Is actually we're going to have to do treatment studies at each location. Each site depends on what's in the water, and what type of PFAS chemicals at what levels. We'll have to do a treatment study at every well site location. Not yet.
Okay.
Our plan is to actually retain expertise, consultant services, engineering and water treatment services to actually start to do these pilot studies to prepare, because the EPA regulations, they anticipate by the end of this year, they're going to finalize the regulations, make them final, and give the utilities usually about a 3-year window for compliance. So we're kind of running against the clock right now.
So you're just waiting like on funding or like for them?
Well, we've identified the need, and we right now are going forward with trying to set up the procurement process. And if anybody works for any of these engineering companies, we are going to be putting out a ad for professional services to solicit interest from companies. We have to follow procurement laws, state procurement laws. Yeah, well, it is meant to make sure there's no, abuse of the process.
Corruption.
Yeah, so we're going to go through the procurement process and retain these companies. It is going to be a challenge for us. We kind of faced this before, first back in the 80s with the pineapple pesticide. Thank you. I don't know what's behind the box every time. In the early 80s, we encountered pineapple pesticide contamination in our drinking water. And that impacted, I think at one time we had 10 wells turned off because of that. And we had to put these activated carbon treatment systems in place. And then we have the Red Hill issue in 2021, the contamination Joint Base Pearl Harbor, Hickam, the spill of lots of fuel in the environment. Now PFAS. So it's going to be challenging times. Somebody told me just this afternoon, this is a good time to retire. Because this is going to be a lot of effort. And Joyce, thank you. She's going to be around. No pressure. First, your question, sir.
Yeah, so in regards to PFAS, one of the slides mentions the commons phase of these new regulations.
Yes.
in your experiences as being the head of the department, I guess you tell us a little bit more about how when you see these new EPA regulations through the comments phase, do they ask for input from major state regulatory bodies before they go into the public?
It's open to the public. Anybody that wants to provide a comment. So if you go to the EPA's website, epa.gov, look for PFAS there, and the comments are done online, paperless. It's online to provide the comments. There is a deadline though of May 30th to that is the closing date for EPA to receive comments. Community groups individuals can provide comments. We are part of national water utility organizations. And I was just on a phone call this morning involving utilities across the country from the East Coast and West Coast talking about these regulations. And we'll be with that association that we're a part of, joining them in comments. Yes, sir. Wait.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, is filtering out the PFAS the only solution? Are you looking at like waste discharge limits for in-point or non-point sources, like you would other chemicals like nitrogen or phosphorus?
So the point and non-point pollutions or contamination or contaminators or polluters, that's very important because cutting off the supply of PFAS being introduced into the environment is going to help us on the long term, not the near term. Identifying the location of point sources of contamination. And again, I sound like I'm raining down on the Department of Defense, but the DoD, and I'll show you later in this slide, was a big user of firefighting foams with PFAS, and they trained, used it, and it introduced it into the environment. Before they, I think, knew that this was such a problem. Non-point might be agriculture or other types, or even airborne PFAS, because if you Google PFAS right now, and where is PFAS found? Unfortunately, this thing is found all over the world. It's been so commonly used for such a long time. It's spread all over the environment.
What is the lethal dose of PFAS?
I don't know I don't know the answer.
I guess the reason I'm saying is even the EPA sometimes gets it very wrong. For example, like radon, they charge people billions of dollars through the Midwest for radon, and radon is a naturally occurring occurrence that comes out of the ground. But they come in and they measure it and they go, "Oh my God, you've got radon and you got to abate it."
Yeah.
So
indoor air quality.
Yeah.
Issues. I don't know what the LD or the lethal dose. I think EPA also does look at the 1 in a million cancer risk for a lifetime exposure, and some of the concerns are about lifetime exposure, but it varies. So that if you go to the EPA.gov website, look at the proposed PFAS regulations. There are whole sections of their proposed regulation about health effects and how they anticipate or study that based on available studies and information, and how they're trying to rate what the relative risk is to the community from ingesting this water at different levels, and also what the cost is. So they're trying to weigh the feasibility that includes the cost.
Things we ingest like mercury.
Oh yeah, and we're not. Water is one source, but food sources are food can also contain PFAS in it. Like somebody just told me recently, eating too much ahi or something you could get high levels of mercury in there, or other things. So I'm not a health expert, so I defer to.
I'm just trying to, if you're talking about 4 parts in a trillion, trying to get a feeling for, is that even relevant? Yeah,
I was trying to calculate what does 1 part in a trillion look like. I think I did try to calculate when they came out with the environmental health advisory what 0.004 parts per trillion looked like in terms of, it was something like 1 drop in the water in 5 Olympic-sized swimming pools. So it's really a minute amount, but don't take my word for that. Google that and check that, because I got to go back and actually check that. What does 4 parts per trillion look like in a way that people can understand? Like how many drops in an Olympic-sized swimming pool?
So 1 drop of motor oil is going to
Well,
swimming pool.
1 Olympic-sized swimming pool, I think, was either 300 or 600,000 gallons. 300, maybe 350,000 gallons in 1 Olympic-sized pool. But so this going.
Wait, which way?
Let's go back to the yellow highlights. No, we can go forward. I'm sorry. Okay, so this list, again, Google is a great thing. I found this on the World Wide Web. This is now the Department of Defense in a report that they are investigating 700 sites, military installations across the country that they're doing PFAS investigations. Some completed, some are still underway. And what's shown in yellow are the 26 in Hawaii, 26 locations. And if you look at some of these locations, a good number of them are here in Oahu. Next slide, please. And we looked at a map. So the pink represents what we call the cap rock, which is the area that if you spill something, less likely to have a significant impact on the freshwater aquifer. So safe area for injection wells or landfills or recycled water. But the interior part of the island is actually where if you drop something on the ground, it could eventually get into the groundwater. It's an area where the aquifer is hundreds of feet below the soil, but really unprotected from contamination. So look at the yellow dots. They represent military installations that are on that list of 26 in Hawaii. The red dot also is the Red Hill Fuel Facility. So this is Army, most of them Army, Navy, and also Air Force. And just recently, this is our kind of our first real example here. It's an Army National Guard facility in Pearl City, in the Pearl City industrial area on Waihona Street, where they trained with AFFF with PFAS in it. And they're doing an investigation. And to their credit, they reached out to us. So the graphic on the right is actually looking at the site there. Shaded in pink are the 2 locations of areas of interest where they did investigations. Next, please. So on the right are detections in groundwater, shallow groundwater at those 2 locations on that parcel in Pearl City. And those are the levels in parts per trillion of different PFAS chemicals. So much higher. Next, please. So this is in relation now looking from high above the Army, the National Guard facility in relation to Board of Water Supply and Navy's drinking water source and the distance away. Circled in red is Waiava wells, Waipio wells. We just reported recently to detections of low levels of PFAS chemicals at Waipio Heights wells. Next, please. So this is some information on Navy's use at Red Hill related to PFAS. They spill 1,300 gallons back in November of last year of AFFF concentrate containing PFAS at Red Hill. Next, please. And some of the other incidents dating back to 2019 involving the Red Hill facility. Next, please. These are, again, the locations of 2 wells, Halava wells here, circled in red, and Mauna Loa wells in relation to the Red Hill facility. The ones that are circled in red are where we also have detected low levels of PFAS contamination. Next, please. This is out of the Joint Base Pearl Harbor HICM's annual water quality report. As drinking water, public water systems, we're required every year to publish, at least annually, these reports telling our customers what we've found in your drinking water. And these are required every year. So the military also operates the public water system for Joint Base Pearl Harbor. They also reported in 2020 and 2021 detection of PFAS chemicals in their drinking water from their drinking water sources supplying Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam. And these are detections of the latest detections at Halawa wells, Mauna Loa wells, and Waipio Heights wells. 2 different well pumps at Waipio Heights that we just came out recently with the public releases. This graphic compares detected levels of what we found. ND is non-detect to 2.2 say parts per trillion. The EPA proposed MCL, which doesn't apply to all the PFAS chemicals we've detected. We've indicated here what does apply. The lifetime health advisory that the EPA disclosed last year, and then comparing to the state Department of Health's levels, or what we call the EAL, environmental action levels. And this is actually the EAL is not necessary for drinking water, but it's to guide site investigations where there's spills, also kind of guide cleanup targets for the responsible party that spilled the chemical in the environment. Next, please. So again, our relationship of Halawa wells and Mauna Loa wells to the Red Hill facility and the PFAS release in 2022. Next, please. And this is also Mauna Loa wells in relationship to Tripler and Fort Shafter. On that list that was shaded in yellow or highlighted in yellow, it includes Tripler Hospital and Fort Shafter as investigations for PFAS contamination. So some of the next steps, EPA's 60-day comment period. So welcome all of you. If any of you that would like to review the regulations and make public comments, you're welcome to do that through the EPA's website. And their target is to finalize the MCL or the drinking water standards for PFAS by end of this year. We are right now in the midst of additional testing for PFAS at all of our drinking water resource wells and other sources for the next 3 years. And actually, we've been testing since 2020 for PFAS. So again, just to close here, we are 100% dependent on groundwater as our source of our drinking water, our precious vide to supply the needs of our community. Petroleum contamination has happened in the Red Hill area. We're very concerned about it because still at Red Hill, there's still 104 million gallons of diesel and jet fuel 100 feet above our drinking water aquifer in tanks that were built 80 years ago. Preservation and protection of our precious and pure groundwater resources are essential to ensure water security for future generations to come. And PFAS is our latest challenge that we are going to face as a community. We will share what we find and we'll keep people informed on how we're trying to address this and let you know what the options are for our community. But we've got total right now 6 wells that have detections of low levels. Anticipate that list may grow. My hope is it doesn't grow too large and that the levels get too high, but we have to prepare for that. If we find right now, even though the EPA regulations have not been adopted, if we find that we're hitting for PFOA and PFOS 4 parts per trillion or exceeding that, then I'm going to look seriously at turning those wells off. And look and see how can we move water from another water system or another well to supply that community's needs in that water system. But if I can't, I may be facing some difficult decisions on what to do. Accelerating the treatment studies and installation of a treatment system, of course, is going to be a high priority, but I'm just kind of giving you folks the heads up. I hope this doesn't become really, really bad, but I also want to tell you, I'm not going to promise that this won't be bad. I just want to prepare everybody. the best thing is to stay aware, and we want to keep you informed of what's happening. We have written, I wrote back in January of this year to the Secretary of Defense requesting information on all their PFAS investigations and history of PFAS use on all military installations on Oahu, closed or active, because that will help guide us. Knowledge is power here. Understanding where these locations are and what was the quantity and types of PFAS detected and used on that location can help us in anticipating what the future might look like. Also, if we go out to drill new wells, I don't want to put a new well right next to a location where the military spilled lots of PFAS into the environment. So it'll help with decision-making on location use sources. We are looking at seawater desalination also. That is in procurement right now. I can't share the details. It is going to be very expensive, but it is now taking our dependency of being 100% dependent on groundwater and starting to diversify our resource base for our community.
What was the chemical that was in Korea?
Korea was
It
PFAS.
was PFAS, and it was that much of a level of us that you guys had to. give?
Actually, that's a good point on that question. I think you're referring to Kunia Village, a small community, farming community in Upper Kunia area. They're not on the Board of Water Supply system, so we don't supply them, but they're supplied by, I think they're using an Army well. So the levels, I think it was maybe PFOA were like 50 to 60 parts per trillion.
Okay,
So significantly higher than what we're finding.
What level do you shut them down?
The EPA is proposing 4 parts per trillion for PFOA.
You were shutting wells down now.
I haven't shut down.
Okay.
I have shut down 3 wells.
When you showed the list of the military, you said, yeah, they had one at 2.2. How many are above 4.0?
So far, we haven't we've detected at 6 wells, and you got to think about the 4.0 only applies to PFOA and PFOS. That's the EPA's proposal. So we haven't found anything at 4.0 or higher. Fortunately, it's been lower, but we have to prepare for that. Because Kunia Village actually is a concern there because that's a military well. And what was the source of that PFAS contamination in that location? There's another community in Kipapa, private well owner for that area between Waipio to Mililani, in that little Kipapa area, Kipapa Gulch, where they have a private well there, and their PFAS levels, I don't remember what it was, but I think it was higher. So they're looking at trying to come off the Board of Water Supply Mililani water system to serve them. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
I actually do like PFAS, like groundwater sampling. I know, like when we sample, we can't even wear certain shirts. Like we wear 100% cotton shirts, and like everything we do
to avoid cross contamination with sampling.
Yeah, like I don't know, the people I work with, like all that stuff. There's a lot of like speculation about like the testing in general because I don't know, like everything has it, you know. Yeah. So it's kind of like just emitting into everything, like coming off our clothes, our pants, our food.
It's everywhere.
Yeah.
So that are we like concentrating more on figuring out how to like filter it out as opposed to just saying like we're going to shut down all the wells that
shutting down all wells, our options rapidly get limited unless we can have an alternative water supply. So testing and treatment is going to be very important. And that's what I think utilities across the country. But your point to your question is, as you take the water sample, you have to be careful not to contaminate the sample because we're now talking about parts per trillion laboratory analysis that's detecting in parts per trillion. So even things like Teflon tape contains PFAS. To make sure that the sampling tap doesn't have any Teflon tape in it, that could give you a false positive or false reading.
So for the portable water wells, is it drinking water that's been like filtered already, or is it groundwater?
It is what we call it's water that's coming out of the well, out of the groundwater aquifer through the well, being pumped out of the aquifer. It gets chlorinated, and then before it enters the water system, what we call the EPD, or entry point into the distribution system, where we take our regulatory samples, we're taking a sample there. Just as before it enters the drinking water system.
Purged. You guys purge the well?
Yeah, we have Board of Water Supply. We have a chemical laboratory and a microbiology lab. So the laboratory techs are trained to take all of the proper procedures to avoid contaminating the sample.
Like the wells, so the wells purged.
The wells are purged as they're turned on. They initially are purged for so many minutes before they start pumping into the system. So we're making sure that we're drawing a sample that represents what's in the groundwater aquifer at that location.
I don't know, wouldn't it make more sense if you guys purged of course like a couple of days, then sample it? It's like if it's just water that's been sitting there for a long time, would it like couldn't it accumulate things from the surface or something?
The groundwater aquifer, from our experience, is always moving. Groundwater in the underground aquifer is moving through the cracks and crevices of a volcanic rock. We rarely find locations where it's stagnated, and but maybe some of the geology could create that. But most of it is moving, usually from Mako to Makai. So these samples are taken at different times, different months. So we feel that, and what we're looking at is reliable results. So one sample positive doesn't mean it's there. We want to make sure that we can repeat through multiple samples almost the same result. That we know that reliably it's there. And what we're seeing is, like Moana Loa wells, we didn't detect it before until just recently. What is changing, is where is the source of contamination, potentially the nearest source. And again, I sound like I'm ragging on the military, but DoD facilities, and they release their own lists. We're starting with that. We're also asking the Department of Health to share with us their knowledge of any past and current studies going on for PFAS contamination.
So is it better to use more water or less water? Because if you use more water, you're pulling more through the filtration system. Is it backing up the filtration system, or is it cleaning the water more?
Well, I would say, for example, the water conservation is always going to be the better route to use less. If we can get by with less, we leave more in the underground aquifer.
So is Hawaii a proponent of gray water systems and rainwater capture?
I am. Again,
some states, they outlaw it. Which is crazy.
Actually, there is some recent plumbing code that was adopted that can now allow for gray water reuse on site, and also rainwater catchment. We have a rebate for rain barrels. Residential customer can apply for the rebate. I forgot if it was $40 or $45. We also do training on rainwater catchment systems using rain barrels donated by Coca-Cola. I just made a plug there. I am sorry, I'm not supposed to do that. But they have these plastic syrup barrels that they don't use anymore. They can't reuse it. So they've been donating it to us, and we've been cleaning them out and holding a workshop on rain barrel. Do your own rain barrel for your home, $35, and you end up with a rain barrel with all the fittings to do it at your home. It's an effort, even though a small effort, but to encourage environmental stewardship or stewardship of our water resources by doing your own part, although small. So on-site reuse. Just think of it this way. Think of the underground aquifer like a bank account, and the rain as deposits into that bank account. All the rain that falls, like the rain today that fell on the Ko'olaus, that we had, and I live in Manoa, and we had some really heavy rain just a few days ago, is like a deposit into that underground bank account of our freshwater resources. And it may be 25 years before that actually reaches the bank account, the aquifer. Every drop less that we use, or every gallon that we don't use, stays in that bank account for the future. And this capacity of this underground aquifer is huge. The water levels, when they first drilled the first well on the Eva Plain by commissioned by James Campbell, the height of the water, the top of the water table was like 40 feet above sea level. Now it's more like 20 or 18 feet, because we've been using the water, and agriculture has used a lot of water too. So it has the capacity to retain water and hold it. So the less we use, we're making deposits into that underground bank account of our underground water resources. So looking for alternative sources like reduce how much we have to pump from the underground
agriculture regenerates, yeah.
The return irrigation from agriculture can recharge, but so it's conservation, alternative water use, alternative qualities of water, non-potable, recycled water, gray water reuse, rainwater capture, helps to keep the freshwater resources in the bank account and builds up.
22 there in California, they're making everybody put in drip lines for the pistachio farms and all that. And the water tables are falling because they're not getting regenerated.
I experienced that in Kauai, return irrigation from agriculture, but for us, we don't really have large scale agriculture anymore in Oahu. The Board of Water Supply is the biggest freshwater user for the 1 million people that we serve on Oahu. I think next up is the military, and then other private users after that. Are there any other questions?
Heard that there is a place on Board of Water Supply site that you can enter your address to your home and it will tell you where your water comes from. Can you share that?
Yeah, go to boardofwatersupply.com and look up for annual water quality reports. And there is an app there that you enter your address and it'll pop up the water quality report for your address that's mailed to your home. In that water quality report, open it up and it'll identify what wells, what water sources serve your address. So to tell you what wells serve your address.
Okay. And then the next question is, in addition to the military, are any private companies named for similar PFAS water contaminations in the state of Hawaii?
Private companies, you mean as polluters, or I'm not aware. Yeah. But I've asked the Department of Health to tell me. So we'll find out. Yeah. The legislature is trying to ban PFAS containing products, especially like food packaging contains PFAS, and try to phase them out coming to in use in Hawaii over time.
What was the chemical you said that the military was using? A something?
It's called AFFF, which stands for aqueous film forming foam. AFFF, and with the addition of the PFAS chemical, it becomes able to withstand the heat of a fuel fire, oil fire, and be able to keep the foam intact to be able to cut off the flow of oxygen to the fire. Because on a fuel fire, you can't spray water. Water would just spread it out, and the fuel will float on the water and spread, so spreading the fire. So the AFFF with PFAS has been, they are looking at alternatives.
What are they using on the Teslas? Because I know I saw a report the other day that like a regular car fire takes 2 tankers. And if a Tesla or a battery operated car, it takes about 8 to 10 fire trucks to put that one car out. And so they're using foam because lithium.
Yeah, right now I talked to the fire chief. He's not using foam with PFAS. So he's using a class A foam, which may not be as effective. Yeah, but they are trying to rethink how they approach fighting fires, even field fires, because I know that HFT is really committed not to use PFAS in their firefighting foam systems, and they don't anymore. Some of the issues that PFAS uses in firefighting foam was worker exposure. So exposure of firefighters.
Let's just do a story on that.
I am not sure, but I did read in the on some of the DoD documents that because of concerns of that for like federal firefighters, they were requiring annual physicals, annual tests for PFAS in their blood. So there's a worker exposure to these chemicals that is also another concern. I am by no means an expert on this subject, but any other questions?
Well, it's 7 p.m. So we're going to close out the meeting, but feel free to hang out, eat, drink, and talk to Ernie with more questions. For those that are new to Rotary, we do a 4-way test that we say together. We basically just talk about our values. So if everyone can join me, the 4-way test of the things we think, say, or do. 1, is it the truth? 2, is it fair to all concerned? 3, will it build goodwill and better friendship? 4, will it be beneficial to all concerned? And 5, will it be eco-friendly and fun? All right, thank you so much. Thank you, Ernie.
Hey, Jenny, can you put the sign in back up on the chat?
Oh yeah, for those that came in late, can you sign in on the QR code? And there's also drinks on the table and more food.
Lots of cookies, so I don't want to take them home.
Thank you.